Sometimes there are moments in rock history that exist only as memories. Snapshots exist here and there, only to remind us that something happened, but no one was really sure what that was. For decades, classic rock fans were left to wonder about the fantastical images from a circus atmosphere. Some of music's biggest stars seemingly all in one room, but tantalizingly from a show that never saw the light of day. December 11th, 1968 was a cold day in Wembley, England when the Rolling Stones summoned an eclectic group of acts to perform for an invited audience at Intertel Studios on Wycombe Road, for a show that was intended to be a companion piece to their new album release, Beggars Banquet. But this show ended up being the ultimate time capsule of the late 60s, a buried treasure that didn't see the light of day until the mid-90s, and featured performances that were both legendary and sometimes head-scratching. This is the story of the Rolling Stones' Rock and Roll Circus. Welcome to another episode of If Guitars Could Speak, the rock documentary series where we look back on legendary musicians, amazing gear, and incredible moments in rock music history. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and be sure to hit the like button below to send more music fans to this video. As always, thanks for watching, and let's get back to the story. In December of '68, the Stones were returning from a relative period of inactivity, having not released an album for almost a year since the December '67 release, Their Satanic Majesty's Request. The Stones were coming off their psychedelic period, which was a clear answer to the Summer of Love and the colorful, overproduced work that was being done down the road by their biggest musical rivals, the Beatles. But 1968 saw massive changes for both bands as they both approached their next releases, Beggars Banquet for the Stones and the White Album for the Beatles, as more stripped down and organic fare. Despite this, the Rolling Stones couldn't help themselves, and they wanted to make a big splash to herald their return to the music landscape by producing a big, bold television special that would see them perform several songs from the new album, as well as feature performances by other bands. Frontman Mick Jagger would approach Michael Lindsay Hogg, a director who had produced 2 promo films for the Stones previously, and who would go on to direct the Beatles' Let It Be film, to produce the show, and the pair began to brainstorm ideas to bring the concept together. According to Lindsay Hogg, he would free associate a number of ideas, and the combination of the circus with rock music seemed to hit the spot with both him and the Stones. They hastily brought a number of circus acts and friendly bands together, throwing over 50,000 pounds at the affair. The performances would start at around 2 p.m. on December 11th, kicking off with a procession of the musicians and various circus performers such as fire eaters, little people, animals, strongmen, but it would be the eclectic mix of musical acts that would make the circus legendary, coupled with the various other dramatic rock stories that were swirling at the time. The first act to play that day was a very new and mostly unknown Jethro Tull, who would work their way through 2 songs in which only frontman Ian Anderson would be recorded live. The one song to make the cut for the final program was Song for Jeffrey, and it featured a very uncomfortable-looking, lanky left-handed guitarist named Tony Iommi, who was miming to parts recorded originally by Tull's previous guitarist Mick Abrahams. As everyone now knows, Iommi would go on to form Black Sabbath less than a year later, and would spend only a couple of weeks with Tull and record no music with them. Reviews to Tull's performance were mixed, and one reviewer calling them arguably the most unbearable band of their day. Ouch! But watchful viewers will notice this was an extremely early version of Anderson's one-footed approach to playing the flute, which would become a staple of his live show in the years to come. The next band to go on would be The Who. The band was fresh off a tour and tightened to razor precision, and they would perform arguably the best version of their mini rock opera, A Quick One While He's Away. The band was powerful, loud, memorable, had the swagger and look to back up the attitude, and simply blew the audience and other musicians away. Incidentally, this was the first song that got me into The Who way back in the 90s when I was just getting into classic rock. This performance absolutely floored me, and I went on to seek out every album The Who ever released and collect the band's entire back catalog. They still remain one of my top 5 bands to this day. Really, nothing else can be said about The Who's Circus performance. It was as perfect a set as you can see. The Who were just a phenomenal and unbelievable live band, and they were just about to enter really their prime as arguably the best live act on the planet between 1969 and 1975, as they backed up titanic albums like Tommy, Who's Next, and Quadrophenia. Taj Mahal, an American blues man from Harlem, was the next act to be featured on the album, but he was actually recorded first before any of the other acts. Although he seemed a little out of place, the gathered musicians were all knocked out by his high-octane, high-energy performance. Mahal was recorded out of order, though, because he and his band actually had to sneak into the country at the time, and Michael Lindsay Hogg wanted to make sure that they got their performance on record. There was very little audience other than the musicians and staff in attendance at the time, and so much of this performance was shot in close-up to hide the empty studio around him. Taj's band would record 4 songs, but only Ain't That a Lot of Love would initially make the cut. Eventually, Mahal's favorite Leavin' Trunk performance would be included on an expanded edition on the DVD release in 1995. The next act would be Mick Jagger's own girlfriend at the time, Marianne Faithfull, who would sing her hit, Something Better. Pete Townsend would say of Faithfull, when she sat in the middle of the floor to do her song, I turned to Keith and went, "Fucking hell, look at that!" She was just so transcendently beautiful and self-possessed. After Marianne Faithfull took the stage, the next band would become the most legendary and strange of the entire affair and would create interest and controversy about their existence until their performance finally saw the light of day in 1996. The Dirty Mac was formed as a tongue-in-cheek reference to Fleetwood Mac, then fronted by Peter Green, and an answer to the British blues explosion of the late 60s. John Lennon had seen this movement as a serious downer, and his White Album tune, Your Blues, was intentionally dark and suicidal as a tease to the often sad and self-destructive lyrics of old blues songs. It was for that reason that he chose to perform this tune as his first live performance since Candlestick Park with the Beatles in August of 1966, with a one-time-only supergroup that needed to be seen to be believed. It featured Beatle John on lead vocals and rhythm guitar, Eric Clapton of the newly broken-up Cream on lead guitar, Mitch Mitchell of the Jimi Hendrix Experience on drums, and the Stones' own Keith Richards on bass guitar. The band would blow through a raucous version of Your Blues and follow it up by a truly strange and, let's be honest, terrible performance by adding John's new squeeze Yoko Ono and a fiddleist named Ivory Gitless in the loose blues jam Whole Lotta Yoko. Ono would belt out incomprehensible screaming into a poor microphone as Gitless played some high-pitched noise as he tried to keep up, ruining his violin in the process. I cannot even imagine what the other musicians thought of what John and Yoko were doing up there, but he was John Lennon, and he was going to do what he wanted to do. But Lennon's willingness to take the stage with other musicians rather than the Beatles was a harbinger of what was to come, as John was clearly starting to drift away from the Fab Four and was becoming the first member to really flaunt his independence. After the Dirty Mac's legendary and partly dubious performance, the night dragging into the next morning of the next day, it was finally the headliner's turn. It wouldn't be until 2 a.m. on the 12th that the Rolling Stones would finally take the stage to perform their set of songs from Beggars Banquet. By this time, many of the young people in the audience had parents banging on the doors outside to pick up their teenage daughters, and everyone else was just either bone tired or so propped up on drugs that the audience was, quote, radically festive, as Pete Townsend would call them. A sad footnote of the performance was the questionable contributions of Brian Jones, who most reported was far away emotionally and psychologically and seemed to only be there physically. Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull would report that Jones was, quote, well past his sell-by date by then, and that he didn't really know what was going on. But despite this, Jones was able to summon just a little bit of his multi-instrumentalist magic for a couple of tunes, especially his slide guitar work on No Expectations and his maraca work on Sympathy for the Devil. The Stones, however, were, of course, completely exhausted by this time, and their lethargy came across in the flat and uneven performances, which were mostly carried by Jagger's boundless enthusiasm and charisma and most likely some drugs. They would soldier through their set as professionals, but it was clear that the magic that some bands are able to conjure on their best nights just wasn't there as their set dragged into the wee hours of the morning. When the circus dust had settled, Jagger and the band decided to shelve the project indefinitely. Pete Townsend would recall, when they really get moving, there's a kind of white magic that starts to replace the black magic and everything starts to really fly. That didn't happen on this occasion, there's no question about that. Some of the footage would show up on The Who's 1979 documentary, The Kids Are All Right, which would lead to questions about where it was recorded and what else may be hiding from this performance. It would go on to enter into almost rock mythology, with people wondering when John Lennon played with Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Mitch Mitchell, Tony Iommi with Jethro Tull. Incidentally, not only was this the only footage to feature Iommi playing with Tull, it is the first known live footage of Jethro Tull, period. Pictures and stories, apocryphal information, it would trickle out over the years, but it wouldn't be until the early 90s that Michael Lindsay Hogg would try to resurrect the project after they found a lot of the lost footage in The Who's own private film vault. The Rolling Stones' Rock and Roll Circus would finally be released in 1996, making its debut on screen at the New York Film Festival. Although the show is not regarded as some of the act's best performances, it is, at worst, a time capsule and an interesting oddity in the sometimes over-ambitious plans of rock bands who extend their reach past the stage and try to put on over-elaborate and pretentious shows to promote their albums. Most music fans would just prefer they focused on putting on great live shows and dispensed with the fluff and extravagance, but as we know, the 60s were not exactly known as a time of frugality or humility, as if you could ever really call a rock star humble. Thank you for watching another episode of If Guitars Could Speak. Remember to subscribe to the channel for much more content like this, and of course, be sure to hit the like button down below to let YouTube know that you think other guitar fans would like to see content like this. We will see you next time on the Guitar Historian channel.